Officer Donnelly thought it would be an easy win. After all, what could a 17-year-old girl, dressed in a simple navy blazer and khaki pants, possibly bring to the courtroom? He had seen it all before. Teenagers without legal training just looking to skate through the system. But Ariel Manning wasn't just another teenager. She wasn't there to be seen or heard like everyone else in the courtroom that day. Ariel was there to fight. The courtroom hummed with the quiet shuffle of papers, the soft scrape of a clerk's pen across paper, and the distant murmur of voices. Despite the routine nature of the proceedings, something about that room felt still, almost expectant. There was a tension in the air, a quiet energy that only Ariel seemed to possess, as she walked in calmly and sat down at the defense table. Alone, Officer Donnelly, lounging at the prosecutor's table, couldn't help but smirk. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and muttered under his breath, "This'll be quick." He had already written the story in his mind. A mouthy teenager trying to outsmart the system. After all, what could she possibly know about the law? It was almost laughable watching her sit there, so composed and so certain. But here's the thing about assumptions. They tend to be dangerous. Ariel wasn't there because she had no choice. She was there because she believed in something that most people never understand until they're forced into the fire. The truth. And for Ariel, the truth wasn't just some abstract concept. It was the foundation of her defense, the very thing that could shatter the facade of authority Officer Donnelly had built for himself. She had prepared like her life depended on it, because it did. While most teens were hanging out with friends or scrolling through social media, Ariel spent weeks immersing herself in the world of law. She watched hours of courtroom footage, studied legal textbooks, and sought guidance from paralegals and legal aid hotlines. She didn't just learn the law, she lived it. Every line of legal code, every precedent, every courtroom strategy, Ariel devoured it. She learned how to argue, how to question, how to present a case with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. When the judge asked her, "Miss Manning, you're representing yourself today?" her calm, steady voice answered, "Yes, Your Honor." No hesitation, no nerves. It was a declaration. And in that moment, it wasn't just a teenager speaking. It was someone who had seen the flaws in the system and wasn't afraid to expose them. Ariel had no illusions. She knew the odds were stacked against her. She knew that people would doubt her, mock her, and dismiss her. But it didn't matter. In her heart, she believed in one thing. If you know the truth, and if you're willing to fight for it, nothing can stop you. As the judge looked down at the charges against her, Ariel didn't flinch. She wasn't worried about the odds. She wasn't worried about being alone. What mattered was that she had prepared for this moment, for this trial, and she was ready to prove that no matter how much authority someone had, the truth could tear it down. And as Officer Donnelly sat there, his smug expression slowly fading, one thing became clear. He had no idea what was coming next. Ariel Manning sat in the quiet corner of the courtroom, eyes focused and unwavering. The murmur of voices in the room felt distant, almost like a foreign language. As the judge glanced down at his file, her mind wasn't on the proceedings around her. It was on something much bigger. It was on what was at stake. And she had made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. "I understand, Your Honor," she had said, her voice calm and steady as the judge asked if she was representing herself. The courtroom, for a split second, seemed to hold its breath. They expected her to falter, to retreat, to be overwhelmed. After all, she was just a teenager. A 17-year-old girl with no legal training, no lawyer by her side, and the daunting weight of a criminal case hanging over her head. Most people would have been terrified. Most people would have given in. But not Ariel. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't bravado. It was something deeper, something she had fought for long before this moment arrived. The truth. Ariel knew the system. She had watched it up close, seen how easily it could crush someone like her, someone who didn't have the right connections, didn't have the privilege of a lawyer to speak for them, didn't have the luxury of being heard. That's why, from the very beginning, she had decided that if the system was going to crush her, she would go down swinging. She would fight with everything she had, and she had no intention of fighting with anything less than her absolute best. While Officer Donnelly and the rest of the courtroom thought she was clueless, They couldn't have been further from the truth. Ariel had spent the last 4 weeks preparing for this very moment with a fervor that most seasoned lawyers would have envied. It wasn't just about reading a few legal textbooks or watching a few YouTube videos. It was about living the law. It was about breathing it in, understanding every angle, every detail. Her nights were filled with pages of legal code, printed out, highlighted in neon colors, and carefully examined. The hours she spent hunched over her laptop in her room, flipping through case studies, analyzing court rulings, and learning how to spot the smallest inconsistencies in an argument. It was exhausting, it was draining, and it was the only way she knew how to ensure that her fight was going to be more than just a desperate attempt. It was going to be a battle for justice. Ariel had also reached out for help, though she didn't ask for it directly. Instead, she immersed herself in legal forums, legal aid hotlines, and online resources. Under a fake name, she called in to ask questions about what she should do, how she could fight this. She didn't want pity, and she didn't want to seem weak. She wanted knowledge. Every day, she spent hours talking to paralegals, listening to their advice, taking notes on what they said, and then running with it. Every tip, every suggestion was a piece of ammunition in her growing arsenal. She memorized everything she could about how lawyers presented cases, how judges ruled on them, and how to make sure she wasn't just making a statement. She was making a point. When her mother, Patrice, told her that maybe she should just take a plea deal, Ariel couldn't bring herself to agree. "We can't afford to gamble, baby," her mother had said, her voice heavy with the weariness of working 2 jobs and facing a system stacked against them. Ariel understood her mother's concern, but she couldn't accept a life of silence, not when the truth was sitting there, waiting to be exposed. Ariel was determined to do this her way. No one was going to speak for her. No one was going to put words in her mouth. She was going to speak for herself. And that decision was final. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Ariel's world became a blur of legal jargon, courtroom footage, and late-night study sessions. But it wasn't just about knowing the law, it was about becoming the law. She had to know how to carry herself in that courtroom, how to stand tall when the weight of the world seemed to be pushing her down. She had to practice speaking in front of mirrors, in front of her friends, in front of anyone who would listen. Every word, every phrase had to be perfect. She wasn't just defending herself. She was representing the truth, and that truth had to be heard. Her teachers, some of them skeptical, others supportive, watched from the sidelines as Ariel turned into something else. She wasn't just the quiet girl in class anymore. She wasn't just the teenager who had her phone out in the hallways. She was the girl who was ready to take on a corrupt system. And that scared people, because it wasn't just a girl who was about to walk into a courtroom. It was someone who had spent hours researching, preparing, and crafting the perfect defense. The day of the trial arrived, and Ariel was ready. She had her binder, filled with notes, case studies, and legal precedents, neatly organized by color-coded tabs. Her notes were precise, sharp, and purposeful. She was calm, collected, and yet there was a fire in her eyes. A fire that Officer Donnelly would soon come to regret underestimating. The tension in the air was palpable as she walked to the center of the courtroom. The gavel echoed in her ears, but it didn't make her flinch. She wasn't nervous. She had prepared for this moment. She had rehearsed her opening statement 100 times in front of the mirror, in front of anyone who would listen, until every word flowed perfectly. Ariel was about to step into the ring with a man who had spent his life in the courtroom, a man who had seen it all. But what Officer Donnelly didn't know was that Ariel Manning wasn't just some teen trying to get attention. She wasn't some rookie lawyer who had no idea what she was doing. No, Ariel was someone who had studied the law like her life depended on it, because in this moment it did. And Officer Donnelly? He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The Arizona sun was brutal that day. The heat clung to everything. The pavement, the metal fences, the backs of sweaty students who'd just been released from the chaos of another school day. Ariel Manning wasn't thinking about the sweltering heat, though. Her mind was preoccupied with something more immediate, something that would change her life forever. It started with a sound. The sharp, raised voices of students, the murmur of a growing crowd. Ariel's fingers paused on the screen of her phone. the sounds of her classmates' chatter fading into the background. She could hear it, the unmistakable authority in the voice of a grown man. She didn't recognize the voice at first, but then she heard the name. D'Angelo. Her heart skipped a beat. D'Angelo Ruiz wasn't just anyone. He was one of her classmates. A junior, loud but harmless. The kind of kid who'd argue over the smallest things, but always with a grin on his face. He wasn't the type to get into serious trouble. But today was different. Today, he was in the middle of something much bigger. Ariel slipped her phone into her pocket, her instincts kicking in. She didn't know why she was walking toward the crowd. It wasn't that she thought there would be trouble. No, it was just that something felt off. Her gut told her she needed to be there, to understand what was going on. It wasn't until she was standing at the edge of the crowd, just close enough to hear the shouting, that she saw him. Officer Donnelly. Donnelly wasn't like the school security guards. He wasn't a neutral figure who tried to de-escalate situations. No, Donnelly was a cop, and he treated students like criminals even before they'd done anything wrong. His towering presence, his sharp jawline, the sunglasses always perched on the bridge of his nose. All of it screamed authority. But today, his body language screamed something else. Rage. He was storming over to D'Angelo, grabbing the student's arm without warning. His voice booming in the tense air. The moment D'Angelo yanked his arm back, instinctively resisting, Officer Donnelly's temper flared. Ariel's heart raced as she saw Donnelly slam the student face first into the metal fence. There was no explanation, no questioning. Just an adult man, gripping a teenager by the neck, forcing him down against the fence with a force that made Ariel's stomach churn. The words, "This is wrong," echoed in her head, but she didn't move. She froze for a split second, unsure of what to do. The crowd, murmuring anxiously, stayed back, watching from a distance. But Ariel, she wasn't like the rest. Her instincts kicked into overdrive. Without thinking, without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, holding it up to record. "You can't do that," she called out, her voice louder than she intended but steady, unwavering. "He didn't do anything." The anger in Donnelly's eyes shot toward her like a spark in a powder keg. He didn't like being questioned. He didn't like being challenged. In that moment, Ariel was no longer a bystander. She was a problem. She was interfering. The tone in his voice changed, and it was no longer about D'Angelo. It was about her. "Back up," Donnelly barked, his tone cold and commanding. His hands were still on the student's arm, but now his attention was fixed on Ariel, who stood there, unflinching, recording every moment. She knew the risks. She knew what could happen. But in that moment, Ariel didn't care. She had to capture it. She had to make sure the truth was visible to everyone. "I'm recording this," Ariel declared again, her voice steady, but now, the defiance in it was undeniable. "Want to interfere?" Donnelly spat, taking a threatening step toward her. "You want to be a part of this?" Ariel didn't move. "You're not allowed to use excessive force without cause," she said, the words coming out sharp and firm. "Do you know your rights?" Donnelly sneered, looking down at her like she was some child who didn't know what she was talking about. "I know my rights," Ariel said, and for a moment, the tension between them hung in the air like a physical thing. The crowd had gone silent. The air around her seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. Donnelly looked at her, his eyes narrowing. There was a flicker of something in them, contempt, maybe, but it was also something else. He didn't expect her to stand up to him, and that was his first mistake. And then, just like that, his hand was on her. She didn't even see it coming. One moment she was standing her ground. The next, she was being shoved violently against the patrol car. The phone was wrenched from her hand. Her arms twisted behind her back. Her heart pounded in her chest as the metal cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. "You can't," Ariel started, her voice breaking just slightly. But it was too late. She could feel the tightness in her chest as the cuffs dug into her skin, the sting of humiliation creeping in. "Obstruction," Donnelly muttered, his voice loud enough for his body camera to pick it up, sealing her fate. Students gasped. A few of them pulled out their phones, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The moment the cuffs clicked into place, everything Ariel had worked for, the careful balance of her world, started to unravel. This wasn't just about standing up for what was right anymore. This was about survival. By the time Ariel's mother arrived at the precinct, she had already been fingerprinted, booked, and told she'd have to face a judge. No lawyer would take her case pro bono, and the public defenders were already buried under too many cases to care about one more teenager's fight against the system. The following days were silent. The world outside her home didn't change. School continued. Life moved on. But Ariel didn't. She couldn't. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything other than what was coming. She couldn't ignore the weight pressing down on her. This wasn't just a fight for her future. This was a fight for justice, for everything she knew was right. And if she had to stand alone to get it, then so be it. Ariel Manning wasn't going down without a fight. Not today. Not ever. Ariel sat at her kitchen table, a place that once felt like home, warm, welcoming, where her mother cooked dinner and they shared laughs. But now it felt like the battlefield. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, but it felt deafening in the silence of her thoughts. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had to keep going. She had no choice. The binder in front of her was now 3 inches thick. It was crammed with pages. Pages covered in handwritten notes, printed legal codes, case studies, and police reports. Neon sticky tabs dotted the edges of the papers, marking the sections she needed to focus on. The inconsistencies she had found in Donnelly's statements, the parts of the law she could use to fight back. Each tab was a small victory, a step toward proving that she was not just some scared teenager hoping for a miracle. No, Ariel was in this for the long haul. She was in this to win. Her mother, Patrice, had urged her to take a plea deal. "We can't afford to gamble, baby," she'd said, looking at Ariel with tired, worried eyes. But Ariel couldn't bring herself to agree. She couldn't just roll over and accept what was being handed to her. If she did, it would be a silent surrender, and Ariel wasn't built for silence. Not anymore. She had fought too hard for this moment to let it slip away. Every night, after school, Ariel would retreat to her room, flicking on the borrowed laptop that her history teacher, Mr. Kirkwood, had let her borrow. She would pore over courtroom footage, analyzing every case she could find. She wasn't just watching, they weren't just videos to her. They were lifelines, guiding her through the darkness. She could feel the tension of each trial, the way the lawyers presented their cases, how the judges ruled. She paid attention to every detail, the rise and fall of a lawyer's voice, the way they held their documents, how they delivered their opening statements. She would practice in front of her mirror over and over again, tweaking each sentence, ensuring every word hit the right note. She couldn't afford to stumble. She couldn't afford to fail. She read the police report line by line, her highlighter hovering over the contradictions. There was Donnelly's claim that Ariel had approached him aggressively. She couldn't count how many times she read it. It didn't make sense. She had stayed calm, calm enough to record him, calm enough to challenge his actions. And yet, according to him, she was the one out of control. She had to prove that wasn't true. She had to show that the video she had recorded was the truth, irrefutable, undeniable. Her heart would race as she marked each lie, each distortion of reality. Ariel knew the video was the key, the one thing that could crack open Donnelly's carefully constructed story. She had watched it 100 times, breaking it down frame by frame, each second a new piece of evidence. She could hear the harsh sound of his voice, the way he grabbed D'Angelo and slammed him into the fence. The moment Ariel had stepped forward, phone in hand, demanding to know what he was doing, she could hear her own voice, clear and firm. "You can't do that," she had said, like a truth ringing in the air. There was no aggression in her tone, no anger, just a steady command of what was right. That was the evidence she needed. That was the truth. But would the court see it? With every passing day, the weight of what was ahead felt heavier. Ariel's mind constantly raced, her thoughts tangled in strategy, facts, and law. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving something much bigger, proving that a teenager, someone who had no right to be standing in that courtroom alone, could take down a system that had ignored the truth for far too long. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. This was her one shot. The courtroom was closing in on her, but she wouldn't allow herself to falter. Each day, Ariel worked tirelessly. She sent emails to anyone who might have some insight into how to present her case. She called legal hotlines, asking for advice from paralegals, making sure she didn't miss a single legal term or nuance that could make the difference. What should I focus on? What should I say in my opening statement? She would ask, her voice steady but desperate for answers. One afternoon, as she lingered in Mr. Kirkwood's class, he noticed her exhaustion. He asked, "You're not giving up, are you?" His words caught her off guard, as if he could see right through the exterior she had been putting up. "No," Ariel said firmly. "I'm just getting ready." And that was the moment. Ariel knew she wasn't just preparing for a trial. She was preparing for the rest of her life. When she wasn't studying or making calls, Ariel rehearsed in front of mirrors, holding her binder tightly in her hands. She would practice presenting the facts as though she was standing before a judge, knowing full well that this moment could define everything. Her posture had to be perfect, her tone even, and her words measured. She couldn't afford to appear emotional, to let any hint of anger or fear seep into her voice. That would only make her seem like the problem. She was learning the language of the court, the language of power, and she was ready to speak it fluently. Each morning, Ariel woke before sunrise, the heavy binder still open on her desk from the night before. The weight of it was a reminder of everything that lay ahead. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. Each case she read, each legal term she memorized, each document she highlighted brought her one step closer. But with each step forward, the weight of the reality pressed harder on her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her future. She was fighting for a voice that had been ignored, for the truth that had been silenced, and for the justice that was so often out of reach. Her mother may have doubted. The world may have looked at her like she was just a kid playing in an adult's game, but Ariel knew better. She was ready for this. She wasn't just preparing to defend herself. She was preparing to dismantle everything that had been stacked against her, and she wasn't going to stop until she did. The gavel echoed in the tense silence of the courtroom, signaling the beginning of Ariel's trial. The same room, the same judge, but everything felt different now. The heavy, stagnant air had a sense of weight to it, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. This wasn't just any trial. This was her trial. Ariel Manning wasn't just standing before a judge today. She was standing before the truth, and she was determined to make sure it was heard as the prosecutor droned on about obstruction and disrespect, painting Ariel as a disruptive teen with a loud mouth. Ariel's fingers tightened around her binder. She had spent hours organizing these documents, memorizing every word, rehearsing every move. The prosecutor's words stung, but they only fueled her fire. She wasn't going to let them define her. Not today. Not in this courtroom. The prosecutor's opening remarks were all too familiar, like every other courtroom drama she had watched in her late-night sessions. But Ariel wasn't watching now. She was living it. The room felt colder, the lights harsher. She couldn't help but steal a glance at Officer Donnelly, sitting confidently at the prosecution's table, his arms folded smugly. He still thought this was going to be easy. He still thought he had control. But Ariel's gaze was steady, unflinching. She wasn't going to let him win. Not now. When the prosecutor finally turned to her, calling her defiant and reckless, the words felt like daggers, but Ariel stood tall, unshaken. Her turn was coming. The moment had arrived, and there was no turning back. She was about to speak for the very first time, not as a scared teenager, but as a voice that demanded to be heard. Ariel rose from her seat, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the judge, the prosecutor, Officer Donnelly, the witnesses, the people in the gallery. Everyone was waiting for her to make a mistake, to falter. But Ariel wasn't afraid. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, and now, with every step she took toward the center of the courtroom, the weight of the truth seemed to lift her up. "I'm not a lawyer," Ariel began, her voice calm and controlled. yet it carried across the room with a quiet strength that made everyone sit up. I won't pretend to be one, but I do know what I saw, and more importantly, I know what I lived. Her words were simple, but they were sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. She wasn't here to play games. She wasn't here to make excuses. She was here to speak the truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone twist it. Ariel took a deep breath and glanced briefly at Officer Donnelly, the man who had pushed her classmate into a fence, the man who had arrested her, the man who thought he could walk all over her, the man who had underestimated her. "I'll let the facts speak for me," Ariel continued, her gaze unwavering. "I know what happened that day, and I can prove it." She returned to her seat, her words hanging in the air. The room felt different now. It was as if a shift had occurred, subtle but undeniable. Officer Donnelly, who had once sat back with such arrogance, suddenly looked uneasy. He shifted in his seat, his posture stiffening. The prosecutor glanced nervously at him, but Ariel's words had done their damage. She had taken control of the room, and they could feel it. The prosecutor called Officer Donnelly to the stand, and Ariel watched as he took the oath with practiced ease. He was a cop, after all. He was used to the spotlight, used to being the one in charge. But Ariel wasn't scared. She was ready. "Officer Donnelly," the prosecutor began, "can you describe what happened on the afternoon of September 12th? Donnelly leaned forward, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "I arrived at Roosevelt High after receiving a report of an aggressive student. When I got there, the situation had escalated. I restrained the student for safety, and this young woman began shouting, interfering with my ability to manage the situation." Ariel's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had been ready for this. She had expected him to lie, to twist the truth to fit his narrative. But this was the moment. This was where everything changed. "Officer Donnelly," Ariel called out, her voice cutting through the courtroom. "How long have you been with the Phoenix Police Department?" 17 years, he replied confidently. "And in those 17 years," Ariel continued, "how many times have you arrested a student for obstruction without a physical altercation?" Donnelly hesitated. His eyes darted toward the prosecutor for a split second. "Several times," he said, but there was a crack in his voice now. "Really?" Ariel asked, her tone even but piercing. "Was I a threat to you, sir?" Donnelly shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. "You were yelling. I couldn't focus on the scene." Ariel didn't back down. "I was standing 12 feet away from you," she said, her voice growing stronger. "You didn't ask me to leave. You told me to back up. And standard protocol is to grab a student by the neck." She didn't wait for his answer. "Is that standard protocol, officer?" The room went silent. Donnelly's face flushed, his bravado slipping. The prosecutor objected, but the judge overruled, and Ariel continued, her questions methodical, her tone unwavering. "You didn't ask me to leave the area," Ariel repeated. "You didn't tell me to stop recording. You didn't do anything except use excessive force on an innocent student. And that's why I stepped in." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Officer Donnelly's confidence was slipping with every question Ariel asked. His answers grew more defensive, more unsure. But Ariel wasn't finished yet. "I'd like to enter a video file into evidence," she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. The judge nodded, granting her request. The video played, the grainy footage from her phone flickering to life on the screen. Ariel had watched it more times than she could count, but seeing it now, in front of the judge, in front of the jury, made it feel real in a way she hadn't expected. You could hear Donnelly shout, hear Ariel's voice, steady and firm, asking, "What are you doing?" The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The footage showed everything. The moment Donnelly grabbed D'Angelo, the moment Ariel stepped forward, calm but resolute, the moment she was shoved against the car. The facts were irrefutable. The truth was right there, for everyone to see. The judge leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes focused intently on Officer Donnelly. "Officer, would you like to respond to what we just saw?" he asked, his voice quiet but commanding. Donnelly shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The video doesn't show the whole interaction, Your Honor, he muttered. You can't see the angle I was at. Ariel stood tall, her voice cutting through the air. Officer, you can't argue the facts. The video speaks for itself. And just like that, the room changed. The shift was palpable, the balance of power tipping slowly, but unmistakably, in Ariel's favor. Officer Donnelly had been caught in his own lies, and there was no escaping it now. Ariel's voice didn't shake. Her heart didn't race. She had done what she came here to do. The truth was out there, and no one could take it back. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Ariel could feel it. The weight of every gaze, the tension hanging in the room like a storm waiting to break. The video had played, the truth had been laid bare, and now the silence felt unbearable. Officer Donnelly, once so sure of himself, now looked like a man who had just seen his entire world crumble in front of him. Ariel's heart pounded in her chest, but her voice remained steady. She wasn't about to let fear take hold now, not when she was so close. She had come this far, prepared for this moment with everything she had, and now all she had to do was finish what she started. The judge, his face inscrutable, leaned forward, his eyes locked on Donnelly. Officer, would you like to respond to what we just saw? His voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that sent a shiver down Ariel's spine. She could see Donnelly squirm in his seat, the confidence he once wore like armor slowly slipping away. Donnelly shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering to the prosecutor, looking for some support, but none came. He knew it was over. His story had fallen apart under the weight of the truth. The video doesn't show the whole interaction, Your Honor, Donnelly muttered, his voice trembling slightly. You can't see the angle I was at. Ariel didn't flinch. She had seen it. She had heard it. There was no escaping the truth. The video spoke for itself. Officer, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. You can't argue the facts. The video speaks for itself. You can't hide behind angles and perceptions. What's on that video is clear. What you did was wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the courtroom, every witness, every juror, every person in the gallery felt the weight of Ariel's words. There was no denying it anymore. Officer Donnelly's credibility had been shattered, and Ariel had done it all by herself. The prosecutor, who had been sitting confidently just moments ago, now looked uncertain. His mouth was tight, his eyes darting between the judge, Ariel, and Donnelly. He had underestimated this teenage girl, just as everyone else had. But now the tide had turned, and it wasn't just about a teen challenging authority. It was about a young woman standing up to a system that had let her down, a system that had allowed Officer Donnelly to act with impunity. The judge cleared his throat, looking down at the evidence laid before him. I've seen enough, he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. We will take a short recess, after which I will make my decision. Ariel's legs were shaky as she returned to her seat, but she didn't show it. She couldn't. Not now. She had worked too hard for this, and no matter what happened next, she knew she had done everything she could. She had fought with everything she had. The recess felt like an eternity. Ariel stared at the floor, her mind spinning. What if it wasn't enough? What if the judge still ruled against her? She couldn't allow herself to think that way. She had to stay focused. She had to trust that the truth would win out. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was even heavier. The judge returned to his seat, his expression serious. Ariel held her breath. The decision was coming. This was it. After reviewing the evidence, the judge began, his voice steady and deliberate. And considering the testimony presented, I have come to a decision. Ariel's heart raced in her chest. She couldn't look at Donnelly. She couldn't look at anyone. She just focused on the judge, willing him to see what she had seen, the truth. Officer Donnelly, the judge said, his voice firm, your actions on the day in question were unjustified. The video evidence clearly shows that you used excessive force against D'Angelo Ruiz. Furthermore, your actions toward Miss Manning were a violation of her rights. Ariel felt a rush of relief wash over her, but she didn't let herself relax. Not yet. As for the charges against Miss Manning, the judge continued, his eyes now focused on her. The court finds that there is no evidence to support the claim of obstruction. She acted within her rights to intervene and record the situation. Therefore, the charges are dismissed. Ariel could hardly believe it. She sat there, frozen for a moment, as the weight of the judge's words sank in. It was over. She had won. She had beaten the system, the officer, the charges. Everything. The courtroom erupted in hushed murmurs, some of them surprised, some of them angry. But Ariel didn't hear any of it. Her mother, sitting in the back row, looked like she might burst into tears. Ariel could barely hold back her own. The emotions she had bottled up for weeks, fear, anger, frustration, doubt, now surged to the surface, and she couldn't contain them anymore. She had done it. She had stood up for what was right, and now she had won. As the judge dismissed the court, Ariel slowly stood up, her legs still unsteady, but her heart soaring. She had done what no one thought she could. She had taken on the system, and she had come out victorious. Her mother rushed to her side, her arms wrapping around her tightly. Ariel let herself sink into the embrace, her tears finally spilling over. "You did it," her mother whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You did it, baby." Ariel nodded, her voice breaking. "We did it, Mom. We did it." It was over, but in a way, it was just the beginning. The story of Ariel Manning, the teenager who stood up for the truth, would spread beyond the walls of the courtroom. People would talk about her, would ask questions. And Ariel knew this wasn't just about one case, one moment. It was about a shift in the narrative. It was about showing everyone that when you stand for what's right, when you refuse to be silenced, anything is possible. She had fought with everything she had, and she had won. Ariel Manning's journey is more than just a story of a teenager standing up in court. It's a testament to the power of courage, preparation, and unwavering belief in the truth. In a world where the system often feels stacked against us, Ariel proved that with the right mindset, dedication, and knowledge, anyone, regardless of age or experience, can challenge the odds and make a difference. What stands out most in her story is not just the legal victory, but the strength she showed when no one believed in her. Ariel didn't let fear dictate her actions. She turned her anger, frustration, and uncertainty into motivation, studying relentlessly, preparing for each moment as though her future depended on it. Because, in many ways, it did. She didn't just fight for her case. She fought for her voice to be heard, for the truth to be seen. This story teaches us all invaluable lessons. First, that preparation is key. Whether you're facing a courtroom or any challenge in life, the more you know, the more you can achieve. Ariel's success didn't come from luck. It came from hard work, research, and the willingness to push through the toughest obstacles. Second, Ariel reminded us that it's not about how many times you fall, but how many times you rise, stand firm, and keep going. She showed us that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it in a world that often seems to favor the powerful and the privileged. Ariel's victory is a breath of fresh air. It's proof that one voice, one determined individual, can make waves and shift the course of events. Her story isn't just inspiring, it's a call to action. Don't be afraid to speak out, to challenge the status quo, and to fight for what you believe in. If Ariel's story resonated with you, if it sparked something inside, we'd love for you to join us for more inspiring content. Hit the subscribe button, because there are more stories to be told, more lessons to be learned, and more truth to be uncovered. Thank you for reading, and remember, your voice matters, always.